Hi, my name is Ó Dubhghaill. I've been asked by Chair and Harp Ireland to talk a little bit about the pitfalls of recording your harp outside. The sound you were hearing just there is the biggest problem we have with recording outside. It's caused by wind blowing across the front of a microphone. You could actually do it yourself by putting your phone into record and blowing across the top of it, and you'll get that same type of sound. It's a nuisance in that it's very difficult to eradicate because it sort of encompasses lots of different frequencies, and therefore when you try to EQ it affects the sound of the harp as well. It can also be loud enough that you can't actually hear the harp, which is no good. But it is one of the most basic problems that you can come across. Now, professionals use things like this on their microphones, and in fact this particular one even fits on a phone and can be used to minimise. It doesn't get rid of it altogether. Professionals use much bigger ones of these with frames inside to make sure the microphone isn't in contact with it. But it does help to minimise the type of sound you get. But most of us won't have access to that type of gear. So we need to come up with some plan of how to minimise the wind. Best thing to do is to actually stand out of the wind. Make sure the camera that you're using is not in the wind. Simplest way of doing that is to hide the camera behind a wall, away from the wind, on the opposite side from which the wind is coming from, or the side of a building if you happen to be near a building, or just using your hand or using somebody using their hand in front of it. So the microphones will be here, so a whole wind might be coming from that direction. It could be coming from any direction. In fact, it's more likely to blow if it's blowing this way across to make that particular sound, but it can also happen that way. So you can put a hand, or if you're mounting it on something, or if you have it on a chair to keep it steady, you might put a book or something down the side of it. Just make sure it doesn't get into the shot. And some of the cameras nowadays have very, very wide angle lenses, so they can get into the shot quite easily. But it is relatively easy to disguise. When I was working in television many years ago, it was always do the interviews behind a wall, even if you wanted to pretend you were out in the country, to minimise that sound. The other type of wind sounds that we hear quite often on recordings is just due to lack of thought about where you are. And this one here now is wind in the trees. The harp is actually sitting underneath the trees and the wind is just blowing. That's only a light breeze, just the leaves are fluttering around in it and causing that sort of high-pitched sound. Again, it's not an easy sound to get rid of. It's more like white noise, and again, it's full of all sorts of frequencies which can affect the actual quality of the recording if you try to get rid of it. While you're out there, you'll probably come across various animals and birds and things like that. And one of the things is that you might hear crows, things like that. Now you might say to yourself that sounds like that occasionally on a recording are not too bad. In fact, if you were doing a solo recording of yourself, it wouldn't be such a bad thing if they were on it, because it sort of places you out in the field where you want to be, where you're showing yourself to be. And the same with the sounds of babbling brooks and things like that. But if it's too loud, it can become an irritant to the person that's listening. Also, when I'm multi-tracking lots and lots of different recordings from lots of harps as they come into me, I don't want a mishmash of sound where you can hear the wind in the microphone, the crows in the background, and you can't hear the harp at all. It is very difficult to work with something like that. So we need to minimise all these things. And while we're talking about sounds, the closer the microphone to the sound source that you want to record, the cleaner that sound is going to be of that particular instrument. So you need to get your microphone as close to the harp as you can to minimise it. If you're sitting under trees, try and do it on a very, very calm day so that the wind doesn't, even the slightest breeze, as I said earlier, just blown through the leaves can actually make it sound slightly just has that hiss in the background, which can be disturbing. Another thing to remember is as I said, mentioned earlier, crows and animals, if they're annoying you or if you think they will stand out in recording, just move away. Go to somewhere where it's a bit quieter, maybe to the other side of the field or away from the trees or whatever. Water sounds, brooks, they look lovely, the rivers flowing down, and little waterfalls and all that, but the noise can be horrendous, especially if you get 3 or 4 of them trying to, you're building them up. It can sound more like a thundering waterfall, like Niagara Falls, than just a little babbling brook. Again, if you're near the sea and the beach and you get these crashing waves or even small waves, by the time 5 or 6 people do that, you've got big crashing, sounds like big crashing waves coming in. So it's really not on. So minimise it, go as far away. If you want to see the sea in the distance, just go back a few hundred yards from the sea, but still show it in the picture, but we don't need to hear it. If we want to hear it, we can add in this sound effect afterwards. There's no point in recording something out in nice trees, nice visibility, if there's cars going along in the background. So get away from the roads as well. Even if you can't see them, you'll almost certainly hear them. And again, that could spoil the recording. As far as placing the cameras, obviously, as a sound engineer, I feel sound is more important than the vision, but you still want to look your best. So it's going to be a compromise over how far or how close, how near or far you put the microphone. I'm talking about a microphone, but it's the same thing. It's going to be the camera and the microphone. The closer you put it to your harp, obviously the bigger you will appear on the screen, but the sound will be quite good. The further away you get, the smaller you'll be in the screen, more of the surroundings you'll see, but you'll also pick up, sound-wise, more of the surroundings. So it is always going to be a compromise. So what I would advise is to do a take with the camera maybe 2 or 3 meters back from you, maybe slightly more, and then do another one sort of closer up and have a look at the 2 of them. Make sure you framed yourself properly and just compare them and see which one you prefer to send in. Listen very carefully to the 2 of them as well. If you can, put headphones on and listen to them. Another thing is, from a sound point of view, I don't think there's very much more if you're not using external equipment. If you have a microphone that you can plug into whatever you're recording onto, well and good, put it as close to the harp as possible. Some people may even put it into the harp. I'm not a fond of that sound, but put it as close to the harp as possible. Don't worry about it being in shot. It's microphones are quite small, particularly if you keep them low. Bring a small stand or mount it on something or a rock or something beside you. Don't put it on a big stand because they look ugly outside. They're not natural. Lighting, a dull day is actually the best type of day to be out filming in because you get a nice even light all around you and you don't have to be worrying about whether you're in shadow or whatever unless you're standing under a tree. But if you're, in general terms, if you have a bright sunny day, although it can look spectacular and the vista around you looks spectacular, it can be very bright when it comes to wanting to pick out details, and you might be very dark if you have the sun behind you, which most people will do, but the background could be very, very bright, but you might be in the slight darkness. Always sort of face or be at an angle slightly to the sun. Don't film with the sun directly behind you, particularly if it's setting, because you'll just get this bright thing in the background. Your camera will auto set itself for the brightness, and then for you in the foreground will probably be slightly dark and may not be properly seen. Use something to steady it. Put it on something. Bring a chair or an extra chair, because you'll probably need one to sit on, but bring a chair or something like that, or if you have one, a little tripod to mount the camera on to keep it steady. I did a video before, you can probably find it somewhere, but I had little gizmos like this for holding the camera, and you can just put them there. The little mount on top of this is missing here at the moment, but it just mounts on there. This can also be wrapped around the legs of things. I'll just wrap it around my finger here and show it to you. So you can stick it on a fence or on a gate post or whatever, and it'll keep the camera steady. The camera should be as steady as possible. How high up, how low down? I always like to think of the camera being at sort of eye level or face level, but you can go a little bit lower. And if you go above yourself, you actually can make yourself look small. If you go below, you can make yourself look tall. It's up to you. Obviously, the harp itself can look small and look tall as well, so it's not going to, in relationship to the harp, it's not going to change things. Some politicians, as an aside, some politicians always ask for the camera to be slightly lower than them because it makes them look taller and therefore more imposing. But I wouldn't sort of think about that for the harp. The harp, you're going to be in proportion with the harp, so don't worry about things like that. But in general, just keep it at sort of maybe chest to head height. Now, if you're putting it on the chair, that's fine as well. It won't be quite as thing, but don't put it on the ground. I don't think looking up at you will do you any favours. Again, lighting, you're going to be outside, you don't need any extra lights, but if you do want to, if you have somebody who's into photography, they might bring a little reflector to bounce a little light into you from one side. But again, it's not something that's important. I'll put all this in a little note that you can download and read, and maybe if you have a look at that before you go out and do your filming. I'll talk to you again soon.